Aaron Burr, a household name in America. Strangely, however, not many people know very much more than just his name. At least, not until the overwhelming success of the 2015 musical Hamilton, where he is portrayed as an antagonist, killing the main character.
Now I'm the villain in your history.
Perhaps Burr should be thankful that this is all that history remembers about him. As we dig deeper, we find a paranoid man tortured by his past, and a part of his life where he resorted to much greater evil than just dueling to achieve his lifelong goal: power. That part, which would come after the duel, was Burr's conspiracy to annex parts of the Mexican territory of Texas and up to the entirety of the newly purchased Louisiana territory. The events leading up to Burr's trial, as well as the final verdict, resulted in one of the most influential trials in the young nation's history. How the government received Burr's plot, and the trial that followed, set important precedents of the country's definitions of treason, free speech, and the power of the court system. To understand why Burr was indicted for treason, one must first understand why he got to the point where he was doing anything that could be considered treason in the first place. All of it began with Burr's infamous duel with Alexander Hamilton. Burr lost his campaign for governor of New York thanks to, according to him, a smear campaign run by Alexander Hamilton. The claim was not entirely unreasonable, as Hamilton had already been recorded speaking very poorly of Burr, writing, "In a choice of evils, let them take the least. Jefferson is in every view less dangerous than Burr, in terms of a presidential election." Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel when he refused to rescind his statements. In doing so, he boldly ignored the fact that dueling was illegal in both New York, where he challenged him, and New Jersey, where the duel actually took place. But nevertheless, the two met on July 11, 1804, and Hamilton was killed. Burr, realizing that his already shaky reputation would be irreparably destroyed once word got out that he had killed Hamilton, fled west, where he began to conspire to commit treason. Burr soon reached the newest territory of the U.S., the Louisiana Territory, establishing a base in the Ohio River Valley and Mississippi River Delta. He had a cunning plan to gain some of his lost power and glory back. Tensions were mounting between the U.S. and Spain, primarily over the territory of Florida. Spain felt that its grip on the New World was slipping, but at the same time the US felt that it still had a lot of destiny and not a whole lot of manifestation. By moving to what was then the western frontier, Burr had planted himself comfortably in the middle of this dispute. Using ciphered letters, he communicated his plan to his co-conspirators, who included his son John Burr, as well as his colleague General Wilkinson, who was the governor of the Louisiana Territory at the time. His plan was simple: raise a small militia, wait for war between the US and Spain, and then take territory to create his own sovereign nation. But it wasn't meant to be. General Wilkinson got cold feet and turned in Burr to the federal government, sending numerous letters Burr had written about the conspiracy to Washington, and thus he was indicted for treason. Treason would prove to be a tricky thing to charge, however. Chief Justice John Marshall had just made a ruling on two of Burr's co-conspirators, Pullman and Swartout. The two had only helped deliver an encrypted letter, so they were found not guilty. Yet the prosecution wanted to continue seeking charges against Burr, citing his alleged accumulation of weapons at Blennerhassett Island in the Ohio River as an act of war. So what was to be done? This had now become an issue far beyond the tale of Aaron Burr. What exactly is treason? Not only that, but how much does the First Amendment protect? These questions and more swept the nation and left the people with no answers, other than that they could be found in what they already knew would prove to be a historic case. After all of the hype, Burr's trial was packed. People came from miles around to watch the trial. So many, in fact, that they had to move the trial from the courtroom to the legislative chamber of the Virginia State House to try to fit more people in. The public's fervor was understandable, as this trial not only involved some of the biggest names in politics, but was also the first trial of its kind in the history of the young country. A feud between a sitting president and a former vice president would have been big enough had it not been presided over by a sitting Supreme Court Chief Justice, a man who would go down in history as one of the most influential to ever serve in that position: John Marshall. Marshall was so essential in the formation of the U.S. legal system that John Adams once said that, "My gift of John Marshall to the people of the United States was the proudest act of my life." As a former Secretary of State, Marshall had a particular affinity for foreign relations, making him an even better candidate to preside over the Burr conspiracy trial. Marshall's rulings would later lay many of the foundations that the United States rests upon today. Jefferson authorized the motion to prosecute Burr, believing that the mounting evidence against him would be enough to indict him. Burr had already been unsuccessfully tried for treason by the state of Kentucky, although Jefferson believed that Kentucky had erred, prosecuting Burr before there was enough evidence. However, Jefferson took this as a tactical error on Kentucky's part, rather than proof of Burr's innocence. Kentucky was trying to exercise its newly declared independence less than a decade after it passed the Kentucky Resolutions. However, ironically, one of the only laws that the Kentucky resolutions allow deferral to the federal government over is treason. Now, why was a sitting president so invested in a single court case that didn't even directly involve him? You see, Jefferson had previously declared Burr guilty of treason to Congress, saying that his guilt is placed beyond question. After making such a bold, sweeping claim before any trial had been conducted, Jefferson had put himself in a tricky situation. If Burr was proven not guilty, then Jefferson's own credibility would be at stake. Because of this, Jefferson and his team of prosecutors left no stone unturned in their quest to prove Burr guilty, even relying on faulty assumptions and reaching out to illiterate countryfolk for evidence. Jefferson's main evidence was an encrypted letter allegedly sent to General James Wilkinson, the governor of Louisiana Territory and a Burr accomplice, from Burr himself. Wilkinson, a notoriously untrustworthy source, turned this letter over to the federal authorities, betraying Burr in the process. This letter provided great detail about Burr's plot to seize Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mexico for his own. Additionally, the fact that he used a cipher at all shows that he knew that the subjects of his writing was illegal. Burr denied throughout the trial that he wrote the letter, which was discovered by modern handwriting experts to actually be the truth. The letter was written by a man named Jonathan Dayton, but the truth wouldn't have mattered because he was working with Burr at the time. In an attempt to scare Burr's legal team, the government offered the testimony of 140 witnesses against Burr, all of whom had the promise of a presidential pardon, but among them none could testify to the same act of treason. During the trial, Burr's team was also able to come up with evidence proving that he was 100 miles away from Blennerhassett Island on the day he was accused of having committed treason. Treason was so serious in the new United States that it is to this day the only crime defined in the Constitution. In addition to requiring matching testimony from 2 witnesses, it also specifies that someone accused of treason doesn't have to forfeit any of their property. The strict criteria required to be charged with treason were fully intentional. The framers of the Constitution wanted to make sure that treason was charged in only serious, legitimate cases, unlike how it had been used in Great Britain, where the king had abused it in order to censor dissent and seize wealth through a process known as the corruption of blood. To this day, treason proves a difficult accusation to prove, although its constitutional definition and the precedent from Burr's trial clarify it greatly. In addition, Marshall used a relatively new, unproven, yet ultimately important tactic to make his ruling, issuing a subpoena duces tecum. This mandate is a court order that requires its recipient to turn over any physical evidence, which was, ironically, in this case evidence that Burr actually wanted admitted. Unwittingly, Jefferson ended up offering the evidence, which in turn would later prove Burr's innocence. By forcing Jefferson's cooperation, the court demonstrated its power, proving itself unequal to the other 2 branches. The court let Burr walk away free after it could not find any specific evidence to confirm that he actually engaged in anything further against the United States than just saying words. To sum up the court's opinion, a scholar, Dr. Mary Jo Klein, described in 1981 that Burr was probably guilty of something, but no one's absolutely sure of what. In the end, Marshall decided that Burr's letter and the rest of his plan were covered under his First Amendment right to free speech, as he never actually engaged in warfare against the United States, merely suggesting that he would in writing. With the specification of the definition of treason, Marshall's ruling established an important precedent, that treason was only to be charged under extreme and specific circumstances. In fact, there have been fewer than 30 treason trials since the ruling, a testament to the strength of Marshall's decision. As Marshall specified that treason needed to consist of levying war as well, it discouraged future presidents from using the law to quell political opposition, as the British did. This narrow definition also further strengthened the First Amendment, showing that U.S. citizens can even suggest war against the government without fear of repercussion. At a time when people were still being beheaded in Europe for speaking out against tyrants, this was revolutionary, and such freedom of speech continues to be a cause championed by the Western world and human rights organizations today. In addition, the successful use of the subpoena duces tecum cemented that members of the other 2 branches, including the president, were subject to the same laws and regulations as private citizens. This would come into play in another monumental case over a century and a half later, Watergate. The judge for that case, Chief Justice Warren Burger, used Marshall's precedent set in the Burr conspiracy case to issue a subpoena for the incendiary Watergate tapes containing evidence of Nixon's crimes, and the rest is history. In addition, Marshall's assertion of the judicial branch's power led to Nixon's impeachment. The faulty philosophy that would eventually lose Nixon the presidency came out in an interview with David Frost after he was impeached, when he described,
"Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal."
By definition.
Exactly.
This line of thinking is exactly what Marshall's ruling sought to disprove. By asserting the court's power to make Jefferson hand over his evidence to the court, he established that presidents were to be held to the same laws as private citizens. Thus, Aaron Burr's trial set a precedent for the future of the country, in which we took another large step towards truly embodying the phrase, all men are created equal.